like to take the opportunity to introduce also someone I think who is quite familiar probably to most, if not all of you. I've had the pleasure of working together now for almost 6.5 years, right? And if there's one person that's made a huge difference in this organization in terms of working with the members, driving our strategy, helping us get to where we are, and putting us on a platform for great success in the future is Pascal. So with that, Pascal, we'll over to you.
Thank you, Kim. Well, it's been incredible 2+ years, and we're finally back in person. That's amazing. I don't even know if I can even present anymore in person. I have to do it virtually. Anyways, I hope you're enjoying Paris, and it's going to be a wonderful week, and we're very grateful for Orange for sponsoring us. And it's going to be incredible, the cruise coming up and the partner conference. So I'm going to cover basically, what I believe is the market evolution happening and where are opportunities for an open ecosystem. I'll then cover basically the details of our automation strategy. And since we're doing the LSO Partner Conference, I thought I'd focus more on the automation aspects than the other services points of views. And then I'll talk, obviously, you heard from Nan and Kevin about the adoption. And I think we did a phenomenal job. And there's still more to be done, but it's all great stuff. And today, I'll talk about why we did the Technology Advisory Board, why it's so critical that we see both the service provider community and the technology provider community come together collectively, collaboratively, and make a difference and create an impact with us with MEF. So let's just start, and I'll start with digital transformation. We all know it's really the big tidal wave of revenue that everybody's going after. It's $7 trillion roughly and growing still massively, and that encompasses everything. But if you think about it, it represents new revenue. We don't understand these workflows fully yet. They're all emerging. These are smart warehouses. These are all these transformational areas of connected vehicles, these IoT sensors and activators, and these robots that are working with AI ML engines, with edge compute, and it just goes on and on. Smart glasses have not even appeared yet, except for the head-mounted displays that are kind of kludgy. But we are getting there, and it does represent new revenue. And I think this is a huge opportunity, and I'll talk about this in this presentation. However, the biggest and the shortest, the lowest hanging fruit of where the revenue is right now is IT moving to the cloud. This is, as Gartner released, $500 billion of revenue and going to $600 billion. That's a lot of revenue, and you're hearing more and more of all of our members talking about how they're all connected to all kinds of clouds as being strategic to their business. And this is the reason why, is IT is moving to the cloud. And this also represents where in MEF and our membership, we really have to think about how this revenue pool that was really done for the relegated of the site to the data center and all the appliances put inside the sites and so on is all moving away into a very different model. And service providers, networks, as we heard from Anne-Marie, coming to Google Clouds. And this represents a very different model, and new revenue to be picked up as everything gets virtualized and software-defined. And so I'll talk more about this. As Nan talked about, we really believe this is the new vision of how things are coming together now in this open ecosystem, this ability to have an open market, to be able to have a workflow, and to be able to provide. On the very left side, you can see right here, on the very left side, you can see that this is the digital transformation part. And that digital transformation part facing the enterprise is not just a browser anymore. It's really about APIs to application developers who are then trying to figure out how to utilize the network to be able to call upon it to do all its digital transformational use cases. And I'll show you some examples of some use cases. The second thing is our providers are becoming retail providers, are going beyond connectivity below, definitely below and moving up the stack and getting past just the connectivity models of the transports. This is kind of where MEF grew up from, is doing and connecting the world with high-speed internet. But as we think about this, the industry is moving up the stack, as Anne-Marie pointed out, and as you'll hear from many of the speakers. It's now going from an underlay, an overlay, a cybersecurity, and an edge all bundled together. And this bundling together is how our members, our service providers, are making a competitive differentiation to the over-the-top players. So I think this is a very important strategy, and we're seeing this constantly with all our members. It's a bundling strategy of underlay, overlays, cybersecurity, and edge compute that is going to make the difference facing the enterprise. And with that, there's not a single retail provider in the world that's going to be able to do this without a whole set of partners. And I'll talk about this partnership in more detail. If you think about the whole ecosystem partners, we used to think about these partners as taking their products and vertically integrated into the networks of the service providers. But that's changing rapidly. We always think about that the partnership is always about access loops. And okay, yeah, we need access loops. And it's always been about how do we have a buy-sell relationship of transports. But it's going beyond transports. And it's more importantly, now we're going into, in cybersecurity, we might need operational clouds. How do we get, MDR, if we're going to offer an MDR, managed detection response, how are we going to have that response in the security operations centers if we don't have it, if the providers don't have it internally, they have to go outsource it through an ecosystem supply chain. Technology providers themselves, we'll talk about the tab, they're all building their own clouds. They're taking their technology, building their own clouds out. Is it a vertical integration of taking their technology and putting it right vertically in the POPs, in the data centers of all service providers' footprint? Or is it a horizontal integration through a set of APIs that can on their cloud, co-located close to their POPs? And that's a very new model that is starting to emerge because it gives tremendous service velocities. And then certainly everyone's connected hyperscalers and all kinds of different other kind of cloud capabilities. So what MEF has done, I believe, that's really important, just like we did with open source. Open source is being really, really impactful because you could take some code, use it, innovate around it, and use it as your baseline. MEF has really, you want to think about, is doing the same thing. We're enabling, and I'll show you some use cases, of a baseline approach of standard, service standard definitions that we did so brilliant for carrier Ethernet. Now we're applying it to SD-WAN and SASE and Zero Trust and Edge Compute and so on. And then we'll focus a lot on the automation aspect. Automation's critically to cut through these services. You cannot just be static. It cannot be the old take 3 months anymore. Everything has to be on demand in real time. And the whole supply chain has to be connected to do that in a very real-time manner. So automation's critical. And then wrapping all of this with certification, testing, training, certification is critical because everybody wants an expected outcome and behavior. They don't want to test it themselves. So certification says that if it's certified, the behavior is correct and the outcome should be correct. However, most members also want to have the ability to provide their own differentiation. And so like any baseline, it should allow competitive differentiation for any operator, any provider, any vendor, any system integrator, so on. And I believe there's a lot of opportunity to provide competitive differentiation on top of the MEF portfolio of services and automation APIs. So let me give you a use case of this example of a baseline. So here we have, for example, a multinational enterprise that comes to a retail service provider and says, I want you to manage completely globally for me all of my underlay, overlay, cybersecurity, and zero trust capabilities. And I want you to do that from a global point of view, and you manage it completely. It's a co-managed model. I want to be able to go and provision my policies, but you turn up the loops for the underlays all over the planet, in this case, 20 countries. And basically, I want that in real time. I want to be able to see and understand what's going on for the performance side, from the security policy side, and so on. So how is that possible? Well, really, at the end of the day, we've done, number one, a service definition that allows the true fidelity and the interoperability of APIs, because service definition tells what the behavior of SD-WAN is, the vocabulary, the behavior, the language, the constructs, and finally, the data models that will go in the APIs. We released version 1 and 2 got released. We've also got SASE, it's baking out, going to be released this year. Zero Trust is coming out with a sister companion specification. We're working on multi-access edge compute for IaaS for a common model, because right now everybody has their own variation, what's a large compute and what's storage and so on. And finally, we've already done the carrier Ethernet attributes and the underlay attributes for IP and so on. So if you take about that service definition, and you'll see that in the slides coming up on automation, not only gives you the behavior and the certification that you can then sell to your enterprise as a retail provider, but if you think about it, if you suddenly have to rely on the automation of the ecosystem partners to deliver this scenario for the underlays, this example, then you're going to have to decide how do you basically get internet access from the various parts of the planet and be able to operate that, even though the retail operator doesn't own any part of that footprint of that internet, of the DIA or the broadband. Same thing with carrier Ethernet. But as you think about it, if suddenly a SASE has to go into an area that the retail provider does not have edge compute capabilities, they have to go find edge compute to load their SASE bits in, as one example, is a vertical integration. Or what I believe is also very common is the idea that they can connect to a SASE cloud provider and basically use the APIs to invoke the SASE and Zero Trust capabilities, and SD-WAN obviously, and use that as a cloud-to-cloud offering. So this is a horizontal integration than a vertical integration. I think this is where the opportunity is. And Sonata and the great work we'll be doing in our automation is really handling all of these potential use cases, starting today with obviously Internet access and carrier Ethernet. But we're building all of these other services because we see this model emerging as a tremendous way to get service velocity and to be able to handle the supply chain demand to deliver real-time capabilities and features and functions that not every vendor can deliver on. And so you have to rely on best of breed from vendors, as Anne-Marie talked about, that all their customers want best of breed and to be able to move fast. Now, you could say, well, and by the way, it still allows the service provider to still provide all kinds of competitive differentiation, as I talked about, and I won't get into that, from anything from their managed capabilities and their basically the portfolios and the richness of the portfolios and so on. Now, you could say, well, that's great. It's for everything MEF defines, but what about for digital transformational use cases that we're still unclear about? Well, MEF still provides a baseline through our automation APIs, which I'll show you in detail, that allows you to define your own schema and basically says you can define your own schema of that IoT, for example, and be able to deliver that in the marketplace and still use it. Now, in this case of the IoT, we have an enterprise that says, hey, Mr. Retail Provider, you manage my IoT service globally, wherever my IoT devices are around the world, and I have narrowband IoT and machine-to-machine and 5G and IoT analytics and so on. And today, this is all done on roaming agreements, where basically, you have to turn up a eSIM from the retail provider. You have to allocate it, turn it up, and then basically, and that's very expensive, and there's a lot of it's riddled full of manual processes. And the ideal world is, how can you use Sonata and Interlude? How do you use Sonata and Interlude to basically turn this up in an automated way? So this is an example of a digital transformational model of a use case using the MEF baseline automation APIs. So with that, let me go for the next 15 minutes into the details of how we do all of this, the automation. And since the LSO Partner Conference will be tomorrow, I think we'll go into many, many more details about the business aspects and the technical aspects. But in conclusion, with MEF, instead of reinventing the wheel like we've seen, and I won't claim from vendors or so on, but we've seen continuously that as the world is changing, as IT is moving to the cloud, as digital transformation is emerging, everybody's talking their own language. They're all talking their own way. They're trying to educate the market in their own proprietary way, and it's confusing the market. I say, personally, that the market of certain areas of SD-WAN, SASE, Zero Trust could be much, much greater adopted if everybody got in the same boat and at least a common vocabulary to start with. So either build from scratch, define your own proprietary APIs, which is what I'll show you everybody's been doing, or get to a common model, just like open source, and that's what MEF is enabling. So let's get in the details of how are we doing these APIs, and then tomorrow's workshops, And in the partner conference, we'll get into really end detail. I'm just covering a little bit of the surface. So in 2017, I believe, we launched our MEF 3.0 Global Services Framework. We did that with the intuition, knowing that there was digital transformation emerging, and IT was moving to the cloud, and we intentionally moved up from our $80 billion Ethernet market, carrier Ethernet market, to start moving up the stack and defining these services. This is 2017. We didn't know how we were going to get there, but we knew this was an important strategy to go up the stack. We knew our providers would have to go up the stack, and sure enough, it's 4 or 5 years later, and it's exactly what's happening. And additionally, we knew that everybody had to get to automation because all of the hyperscalers are highly automated, and everyone want to copy that model. So how do you do automation without proprietary, bespoke, custom APIs? And finally, test and certification. So these 3 areas we thought were very strategic and core for our strategy, and we invested heavily. Fortunately, with the minutes I have left, 50, I cannot cover everything. So I will, on this quarter, not cover on the service categories, but I did cover that, and you can get on demand, look about what we were doing in services on the Q1 end of January meeting that we had virtually. You can see that on our website and grab that. And I talked really in details about that. But I'm going to cover the automation aspects, if you don't mind, on this session because of the partner conference tomorrow. So I believe every ecosystem that is really flourished on the supply chain, as you know, and we're seeing that today and being impacted with the way our inflation is because the supply chain is being impacted. But every ecosystem has a supply chain, and more importantly, it's open. An open ecosystem is critically important for success. And what we've been seeing in the past is all these proprietary APIs, proprietary services is not a way to go. If you look at anything from Wi-Fi to Bluetooth to TVs to everything, it always has been around the standard definition, an open ecosystem participating. The second thing is supply chains work from a buy-sell model. Whatever a supplier can't, whatever buyer demands and the supplier can't supply, then has to rely on its partners to supply it, and it goes in a recursive model, and I won't spend in detail as you know, but this is very important. And you got to do this in an automated way. We cannot be doing this in a manual way of, let's pick up a phone and phone people and see how they have it or not, they have the part, or they have the capability of this function. That doesn't work. That's all old time. Today, it's all very modernized. It has to be real time, on demand. Everybody wants to understand what's the price, what's the capability of the service, and so on. So the way we've been doing this is really convoluted as an industry, and it's really concerning that has taken an industry of a telecom industry so long to figure out that automation is critically important for the success as much as the services. And in the past, what's happened is there's been proprietary ways, from emails to manual ways to basically, custom APIs as being the norm. Everybody building their own API and saying, hey, you want to work with me? Use my API. And then now, next time I have to go to the supply chain, I have to use their API. And it goes on and on and on. The time it takes to do that is really costly and really, really, really expensive just from a loss of opportunity and time. What we're saying is, and I'll go into detail, is how we built our automation APIs. We built them in a very strategic way, which I'll go into details, that allows not only the full life cycle of the commercial operational aspects of the supply chain and this ecosystem, but the ability to do that with any service, and I'll talk about that in detail. So as you know, we had delivered our MEF-55. When I first came here 6 years ago, it was a framework document. Since then, it's been evolved. I won't get into this. If you're not familiar with it, it's these reference points. Musical term means reference points of APIs, business-to-business systems talking to each other between the ecosystem of the retail provider, the wholesale operator, or the partner, or facing the enterprise. And then these are service orchestrators that have come in to take place of people doing all the provisioning of the network through machines and so on. So, however, it's going beyond APIs. Web 3.0 is emerging because Web 3.0 has realized that we got to get to decentralized to DLTs. And distributed ledger technology, blockchains in essence, the slang, is really where the market's moving really rapidly. And DLTs are solving many, many use cases. But to have a DLT, you need to have a trusted identity, a digital identity. And this is where the self-sovereign ID model is coming in. It's all about decentralized IDs, DIDs they call them, and verifiable credentials. And that is forming the basis of when a connected vehicle wants service of an IoT device or machine or any even user. As you're saying, you go to sites, you get your ability to just use a Google or a username and password to get to a site and use that as your password username. But this is there's no identity provider involved. It's all decentralized on a blockchain. And I won't give the details, but this is a very critical aspect of where Web 3.0 is coming into. And basically, finally, there's these apps that sits on top of it. So at MEF, we've actually defined MEF 114, and that's an application called how to automate through a blockchain invoice and settlement. And this is a very critical aspect. It's a standard, look it up, it works with our APIs, we're well advanced, and now we're doing a showcase with nodes of how the nodes are coming in a blockchain mechanism to start using this use case of basically to invoice and settle in a very automated way and to cut the time and the errors by immensely and not have to manually auto process this. So this is a very important part of the strategy. It's not just APIs. So yours, for example, are Sonata interlude APIs. We've been working for forever. You could see the use cases, and I'll talk more about these actual APIs. These commercial APIs has a whole bunch of scenarios. They all do certain things from address locations to be able to look at a product and to look at what's available on that product, what kind of qualities of the product, to be able to get a price code, order it, and so on. And finally, once that's ordered, to operationalize it, to actually turn up the service, to see if it's performing right, fault management, to open a trouble ticket if it's not working right, all that stuff is all the life cycle management. And then blockchain plays the part of today just invoice and settlement. And this is across that wholesale ecosystem, that retail wholesale ecosystem we're talking about. And we're getting tremendous progress in this area. And we talked about the adoption. I'll cover a slide about the adoption in this area. But we talk about digital transformation. There's massive, massive opportunity as we look at all of these use cases of how they'll consume APIs. And again, everybody talks about operational parts of this, but you don't think about every one of these things has to first think about I need to be able to go get and order my compute to load in my AI deep neural network to do specialized things, and I need to get a price code on that, and I need to be able to then instantiate and load my bits into there. So all of that stuff is very important than just operationalizing it to see performance-wise. So this same life cycle of commercial operation applies into the digital transformation world of inside the enterprise for edge compute and so on. So how do we do all of this? And really at the end of the day, we do this, and we've done it really, really in a very methodical and calculated way. And about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, we had no APIs, and today we have a really incredible set of assets, which I'll go through in not only our APIs, but our full automation capabilities. And thanks to our LSO committees and our digital service committees and all our memberships and the staff and all of our consultants, we've really done a tremendous, tremendous job. I cannot be more happier than where we are today than most organizations. So let me start with how we do this. So the TM Forum, as you know, has been used by many operators for decades. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we decided how could we take the TM Forum APIs and use them correctly. We found that TM Forum APIs were really good, but they need to be changed. They'd be changed to be specific use cases for each, for example, an address. We had to really clarify what is an address for every part of the country. That took a change in the APIs. TM Forum also did not define the service of product definitions. You could do a quote, order, bill on anything. Pizzas, it could be on flights, it could be on bandwidth, it could be on anything. So we thought about, wait a minute, to get true reality and ability across the supply chain, you're going to have to define these service definitions in a schema because machines have to be very explicit. So what we did is we modified the TM Forum APIs with blessing from them and governance with them And we then additionally added all of these schemas, what we call payloads, these product and service schemas, carry Ethernet, now we're doing internet access, SD-WAN facing the enterprise. And as these other specs come into place, we will be adding them into all of the, our APIs also. And then finally, we take them together and we take the products and service schemas and the APIs themselves, and they have a schema to it, and we blend them together in one big REST JSON schema and a big flat schema that could be used. And I won't get into those ways of doing, we call that static binding, but there's also a way of using this payload in a dynamic real-time model as the actual, in runtime, actually can parse the schema at runtime, but that's called dynamic binding. Kind of technical, we covered in the LSO conference tomorrow. But we have all of these capabilities. Additionally, we realized that not only do we have to define payloads and schemas for our APIs I talked about, but we also realized, as I said, for example, how could our members reuse all of these APIs and use how we do schemas for our services in MEF? How could you define your own? Like, for example, SIP trunking or an IoT service. Did you have to now go and invent your own commercial operational APIs for that one use case of IoT or vehicle or smart glasses or SIP trunking? No. Basically, we now have this idea of a MEF endorse model, which says that just like the App Store, you can build, and we'll teach you how to build your own schema through a guide. You build your own schema for something we don't define, and basically you can launch that in the marketplace, and we will actually validate it through a process that it'll work with our APIs. Very powerful idea. What does that mean? Use our APIs, the MEF APIs, not for just MEF services, but for any services you can imagine, because it has the full life cycle management, which is exactly this. In a supply chain model, as I talked about, following across from address validation, site validation, to looking at the product, to looking at what capability the product can do, to getting a price quote, to ordering it, then updating the inventory in real time, then sourcing it, to then source ready testing it, to performance management, making sure the service is running, making sure that if there's a fault, how to identify the fault, to do troubleshoot if there's troubleshooting needs to be done across the supply chain, to finally whole invoice and settlement. This is what MEF has done. We've taken the 60 plus APIs from TM4 and condensed them to a full life cycle of basic commercial and operational APIs with all of the basically schema definitions for product and services, to basically do with then the DLTs. I talked to the blockchain networks to do all of that automation and invoice and settlement to start with, and to have decentralized IDs, DIDs, and verified credentials, which is the modern world of Web 3.0, to finally the whole tooling, support, and so on. So what does that look like? In essence, we took the TM Forum with their blessing, the 60 plus APIs, and for years, I remember, and if most of you remember, and the committees remember, we argued around the use cases of what is a quote and what is an order. And for example, on an order, there's the actual order, and then there's the modifying the order, the cancel the order, and these are not the APIs. These are the actual workflows of what order should look like, or quote should look like, or what an address should look like. And we years came up with specifications, what we call the business requirements and use case specifications. No other organization has this but MEF. We have done this, and it's an incredible amount of work. And I ask you to read one of these, and you'll see how detailed this is. And every one of those APIs I showed you around the circle has one of these things. We also then took from the 60 plus APIs, figured out the life cycle, like I talked about, and basically then said, you know, how do we modify those APIs in accordance with TM Forum and their governance? We then further, not working. Great. Could you advance that? Okay, there we go. We created a developer guide, and these developer guides are really detailed as a developer of how to implement. They have sequence diagrams for REST calls. What are the callbacks? What's the error codes to be expected? Really, really detailed stuff that you won't find anywhere else. And it's really, we have that in our MEF assets. Not working. Next slide, please. Just build it out. I guess I'll just point to it. So then you could see that we also did the product and service schema models. And you can get that today inside our SDKs or on our store, our marketplace store. You can see these carry Ethernet schemas, you can see the internet schemas, and you'll see other schemas coming up. You can see SD-WAN, SASE, and so on. We also have a schema guide, how to interpret these schemas. Okay, we have this idea of a development handbook, as I talked about. If you want to build your own service or product schema that's not MEF defined, we'll teach you how to do that, including the process. We have the tools that I talked about, and you'll hear about the partner conference called static and binding, dynamic binding tools. We have developer support. So if you want to implement an API or a member wants to implement an API, they have questions, they have a community, they have support capabilities, and this developer support is very, very knowledgeable. Basically wrote a lot of the guides itself. And then we have this onboarding interop test platform, which basically says that, you know, instead of a provider has to onboard 40 or 50 partners, they can take the 50 partners and say, go to this cloud that's this onboard interop test platform and go test it there. And if it works there, as you're developing and testing it, it's going to work with the retail provider. And then finally, we also have the certification that says, once you've done all your dev and testing, you can certify to know it's going to work right. And to top it all of that, we have, next slide, please. We have a marketplace that we launched, and so that's really incredible. And I'll let Daniel talk about that tomorrow. So adoption, next slide. As was talked about, we have tremendous adoption appearing today. As you can see where we are, we have 29 providers adopted these APIs, and we see them continue. And this APIs can be used, again, in the Cantata Allegro facing the enterprise. Same API, same lifecycle, just different schemas, product server schemas. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to come to my end. I'm a little bit over, 1 minute, a few minutes over. The tab, why was the technology advisory board so critical? We found that in order to make this, what I just described, this ecosystem, the supply chain to come together, there had to be more than just our board of advisors, which are mainly service providers. We also felt the technology advisories, the technology providers themselves, are providing a tremendous innovation to our service provider community, and they need to be part of the strategy decisions going forward. And so we decided to create this tab, and basically we think about the tab from cybersecurity, from automation, from underlays, overlays, and even edge computing, which we've still not added in the tab members yet for edge computing. We had a great meeting yesterday with the board and the tab. Everybody showed up from the board and tab, and we had an incredible conversation, and it really, really was fruitful, the discussion. We talked about, and our thinkings about how can we increase revenue faster together. Next one, please. Including ensuring differentiation. How can we increase the market adoption, you know, of not just the MEF work, but of SASE and zero trust, and as we get to the digital transformational use cases. Next slide. And then how can we make the efficiency supply chain better? So these are the three main themes we're talking about. We came up with some great outcomes for the next time we meet in July. And then finally, these are our tab board members. As you'll see in the panel, two of them are here, and I want to thank them for showing up in person, both JL and Craig. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate that. And all the rest of them showed up virtually, and from all parts of the world, in Australia, Hong Kong, so on. We had an incredible discussion, and I think we have an incredible set of board advisors who are incredible luminaries in our industry, and now we have incredible technology providers, luminaries in what they do really well, and together, a better together ecosystem that's really going to make a difference and impact for MEF. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm running just 3 minutes over, but thank you.